Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Hope you all had a wonderful Christmas. We're nearing the end of we're only a couple days till actually we're only one day away till the end of 2022. And welcome as always to episode 34 of the FilmBrony podcast. I am of course the guy in charge of this, Nick Nino, and as always, I'm not alone on this. I got a guest with me who started this whole podcast since the very beginning. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Well, you all pretty much know who I am. If you don't, you can pretty much read my name. I pretty much do whatever I want, like videos, stories, pictures, tier lists, whatever I feel like it.
Okay, nice, nice. So we got a podcast. We got a show for you guys today because this is a special episode. This is not just the 34th episode of the Film Brony podcast. This is also a very special episode too, because after we covered the Blu-ray Showcase and a couple reviews on and a few reviews on the movies that both Søren and I saw, we're gonna bring you our list of the 10 worst films that we saw in 2022. And I guarantee you guys, I'm really looking forward to rating. Søren and I are just looking forward to raining hell on those movies that caused us physical pain. So, yeah, that'll be coming up in a little bit. But as of right now, let's get on with our usual thing we usually do on this podcast. So, starting with the Blu-ray Showcase.
All right, I got Balto,
Nice,
Eye in the Sky,
nice. That's a good one.
The Ghost Writer,
Nice,
Grand Piano,
nice.
Lamb,
Lamb was really good, even though it's one of the weirdest films I've ever seen.
Marcel the Shell with Shoes On,
I love that movie. Love that film.
What the Year's Most Underrated, Memory.
Nice.
I also got
Nope.
Rampage,
Nice.
and last but not least, Unsane.
Nice. All right. Well, I got a lot of Blu-rays that I want to show you guys. A lot of them. I got for Christmas, and then the other three I just got in the mail today. So, and actually, there's one that I actually got from Best Buy. So, anyway, here are the Blu-rays that I have with me for today. My first up is my favorite film of 2014, Whiplash.
It's my number one as well. It's one of my favorite films as well.
Yeah, it is. It is a wonderful film. It's one of the best movies ever made. J.K. Simmons deserved that Best Supporting Actor award. He was fantastic. Next, I have another Jordan Peele film, Us, one of my favorites of 2019.
That's an underappreciated one from him.
I agree. Next is one of my favorite movies of 2020. I really didn't think they would end up making the Blu-ray of this, but here it is, Kajillionaire.
I still need to get that when it's on sale.
Yeah. And then my favorite animated film of 2020 and one of the best films I saw from that year, Pixar's Soul.
You know, that's like the last really great movie that Pixar has done. I mean, Luca was pretty good, but then Turning Red and Lightyear were, eh. I just hope Elemental is good.
Hope so too. Next, Bros. I love this movie.
All right.
Next, one of the biggest surprises I've seen this year, Mrs. Harris Goes to Paris.
Hear good things about that one. I'll have to check it out on my own time.
You should. It does have its share of predictability, but it is a damn great film. Next, one of the most divisive films of the year. Yet I thought it was a great film that did a fantastic job at satirizing the Gen Z people. Bodies, bodies, bodies.
Oh boy, Austin Partner would hate you for this. He just did his worst list.
Yeah, I know. I saw. I already saw, and yeah, I'm not surprised. It's been receiving a lot of like divisive reviews. I mean, like I said, I love the film, but I did not like the ending. Next, the prequel to X, Pearl.
Good.
And then the documentary film I absolutely loved, Hallelujah, Leonard Cohen, A Journey, A Song. Next up, one of the most overlooked independent films I've seen this year, Emily the Criminal.
I'll have to get that as well.
Next is one of my favorite movies I've seen this year, and yet it also received mixed reviews from historians. But you know what? The Woman King. Mm-hmm. Next is another documentary film I got for Christmas. I absolutely love this one. I think it's the best documentary film of the year, Moonage Daydream.
I hear it's way better than that David Bowie biopic from 2020, Stardust, I think.
I think it was fictionalized, but I'm not sure. Anyway, and then the last two, I was really excited to get these last two because they're both in my top 5 of the year, and they're both in my top 5 of the year, and it was just incredible that they were going to be coming out for Christmas just in time. One of my favorite movies this year, Tar.
It's in my top 15.
Nice. And then one of my top 2 favorites this year, already neck and neck with Everything Everywhere All at Once, The Banshees of Inisherin.
That's a freaking masterpiece if I ever saw one.
It is a freaking masterpiece. And then the last 2 are Criterion Collection movies that I got. We have my number 2 film of 2020 and Søren's number 1 of that year, Sound of Metal. And then my number 5 film of last year, Jane Campion's The Power of the Dog.
You know, I think Benedict Cumberbatch won Best Actor that year. I know it's not. I know people. It's not because of the slap. Get over it.
Seriously. Although we'll have to talk about that in a bit.
Speaking of Will Smith.
Oh boy.
My first movie review is Emancipation. This movie is essentially Will Smith trying to redeem himself, kind of like how Amsterdam was a vain attempt for David Russell to redeem himself. And while this isn't quite as bad as Amsterdam, as it delivers solid direction from Antoine Fuqua, and Will is at least trying to work through whatever action he's trying to pull off, but it's ultimately a mess. I really had a problem with the color grading in this movie, as I can't decide whether to have this overly decentralized style or give it a blue filter. Plus, this movie starts off as an extremely slow Oscar bait drama that's overindulgent in its slavery message, until out of nowhere it becomes this action war film an hour and a half in. I know I'm basically copying what Jail Apocalypse said about B-movie, but it's like they presented the studio with these 2 different movies, but the studio can't decide, so they said, do them both? Honestly, it's not really worth recommending, even if you're rooting for Will Smith to return to the spotlight, and I'll give it a seal mediocrity.
I could not stand Emancipation at all. I mean, how did they take a sensitive subject like slavery and make it into a boring and inconsistent mess where it can't even decide if it wants to be an action movie, a drama movie, or a war film? How is that even possible? Also, what the hell is it with Apple Original Films this year trying to relive their success of Coda winning Best Picture by rushing their movies out for the sake of getting an Oscar nomination? First, the greatest beer run ever, and now this? Really, guys? Not only can you tell that this movie was made for the sole purpose of being Oscar bait, as well as Will Smith trying to redeem himself after the infamous slap incident earlier this year, but, and as much as I hate to jump on the bandwagon and contradict myself, this is a slap in the face to history and a slap in the face to everyone's intelligence. Emancipation, and that's why this movie, Emancipation, is one of the most inconsistent, inept, rushed, and emotionally manipulative movies I've seen this entire year. I mean, when you take a sensitive subject like this and just do almost nothing about it, then you're completely disrespecting like not only the real person that went through the horrors and trauma, but you're also basically disrespecting history as well. And that's what Emancipation is guilty of. The only positives I have with the film were that the acting was very good. Will Smith does give out a very good performance as Peter, and Ben Foster delivers such a powerful and menacing performance as Jim Fassel. He was terrific in the film. His character is such a despicable dickbag for what he did to Peter, but he's one of those characters you would love to hate because of how powerful Foster's performance was. It has a very good score by Marcello Sarvos, and the film does deliver excellent production by the costume design, fascinating sequence towards the end, but that's it. The story was a rushed mess since it was also all over the place as a result of this. The script, the screenplay, is one of the worst and most fatally messiest scripts of the year due to it having bland dialogue, characters you don't care about since they come up as being shallow and paper thin, and the tone being very inconsistent and all over the place. Not to mention that Antoine Fuqua's directing was a muddled mess. I mean, from the guy that directed Training Day and Southpaw and The Equalizer, you would expect his directing to be at least well done, right? Well, think again, because his directing was a muddled mess. The editing was all over the place, and this is also one of the most sluggishly paced movies I've seen this year as well. Since for a movie that's 132 minutes long, it felt like it was going on for 3.5 hours. I was also very disappointed in Robert Richardson's cinematography that he shot for the film, since it can't even decide if it wants to be in color or in black and white. So they just had to compromise it, which does not work. What's even more shocking about Robert Richardson, is when you realize that he's the same cinematographer that collaborated with other legendary filmmakers like Martin Scorsese, Quentin Tarantino, John Sayles, and Errol Morris. And the fact that this was the best he could do in this movie is completely baffling. Just baffling. And not only does the film go for those cliches that we've seen in other films before, but the ending was nothing but a rushed and underwhelming mess. Overall, Emancipation is one of the most inconsistent, inept, rushed, and emotionally manipulative movies I've seen this entire year. After seeing this movie, not only am I done with Will Smith, but I am getting very sick and tired of seeing movies that are not only rushed out just to get an Oscar nomination, but also very disrespectful to history. I could not stand this. I could not stand Emancipation at all. Do not waste your time with this. 3 out of 10 or a D+.
Next up is Violent Night. I'd say this is far from the next greater Christmas classic, as I felt it suffered from a lot of action tropes and slow moments. But this is otherwise a fun romp about a drunk yet compassionate Santa Claus stopping a hostage situation, taking names and kicking ass. I'd say this is worth spending the holiday season, maybe even every Christmas every year. I'll give this one the seal of approval.
I enjoyed Violent Night very much. I'm pretty much in agreement with what Søren said. I don't think it's a Christmas classic like some are claiming it is, since the story at times can feel a bit uneven, and not only does it have its share of cliches that we've seen in other films before, but I did think the film was 15 minutes too long, and it does suffer through some pacing issues here and there as a result of this. But for what it stood out as, I had a good time watching Violent Night. Imagine if Die Hard met Home Alone. That's what Violent Night is. And how ironic, given the fact that they also reference those two films in the movie as well. David Harbour nailed it as Santa Claus, and John Leguizamo and John Leguizamo nailed it as the over the top villain named Jimmy Mr. Scrooge Martinez. And best of all, he has some funny moments in the film as well. I was also very surprised with Leah Brady's performance as Trudy Lightstone. She acts like a real kid when they're this young, and they're always believing in Santa Claus. Now, and while that might sound a bit of a cliche to tell in movies like this, it actually works for her character, and this is one of the better kid characters I've seen this entire year as a result of this. Admittedly, I didn't know what to expect going into this one, other than it was going to be David Harbour playing Santa Claus. And after seeing this movie, Violent Night was a surprisingly good time and a solid Christmas movie. I really enjoyed this movie, and I overall give Violent Night a 7 out of 10 or a B.
And as soon as my next one is Empire of Light, and this movie has a lot going for it, and Sam Mendes does this spectacularly, giving us great performances, especially from Olivia Colman and Michael Ward, and it delights the eyes and ears with gorgeous cinematography and a fantastic score from Rasner and Ross. But the screenplay is such a mess, since it's filled with underdeveloped subplots and romantic cliches you've seen a million times before. But I Spectre, this is hands down Sam Mendes' weakest film, and I'll give it a C or accuracy.
When I went into Empire of Light, not only was I looking forward to seeing this movie, I thought Empire of Light was going to be a terrific love letter to movies. Unfortunately, after I saw the film, that wasn't the case. In fact, not only is Empire of Light one of the most disappointing films I've seen this year, this is also one of the most horribly misguided and inconsistent movies I've seen this entire year as well. This is a movie where what could have been a great love letter to movies ends up falling flat due to how poorly structured and all over the place the film felt. The only positives I have with the film were the acting was terrific. Olivia Colman gives out one of the best and most powerful performances I've seen this entire year. The way she performs the character is nothing short of outstanding. Michael Ward, Colin Firth, and Toby Jones were also great in the film as well. Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross's musical score was fantastic. And so was Roger Deakins' cinematography. And the film also has very good production values and costume design as well, since it feels like you're back in the early 1980s. But that's sadly it. The story could have been interesting and had me emotionally invested, but it ends up falling short due to it being a muddled mess. Not to mention that not only was I disappointed with the way Sam Mendes directed this movie, since it was hard to tell what he was trying to accomplish due to how messy it felt, but the screenplay for the film is the biggest fatal flaw I have with the film, due to its dialogue being bland and stilted, characters coming across as paper thin and shallow, a tone that feels very inconsistent, where it can't decide if it wants to be a romance film or a drama film, and themes of racism and mental illness that get lost due to it showing small glimpses of these themes and saying nothing about it at all. It's clumsily edited. The pacing was a sluggish mess. And not only is it filled with cliches that we've seen in other films before, but I also found the ending to be a rushed mess as well. Despite a well-acted cast, including Olivia Colman giving out one of the best performances I've seen this year, Empire of Light is one of the most horribly misguided and inconsistent movies I've seen this entire year. Better luck next time, Sam Mendes, because this was a huge disappointment. And like Emancipation, it gets a 3 out of 10 or a D+. I'm sorry, but I couldn't stand this movie. Better luck next time, Sam Mendes.
Next, we have Guillermo del Toro's Pinocchio. Now, I'm one of the few people who can actually defend the recent Disney remake as an underrated gem, but Guillermo del Toro's version blows that movie out of the water. I'm glad he insisted on making this a stop motion film as opposed to CGI or 2D animation, because he takes the medium to his advantage by giving us a fantastic looking vision throughout. The music by Alexander Desplat is also something to behold in both the instrumental score and the surprising amount of songs sprinkled throughout. The cast is also spectacular, from Gregory Manners, the Wooden Boy, Ewan McGregor as the Cricket, Christoph Waltz, to even Kate Blanchett as a monkey. Plus, it makes sure you laugh throughout and cry at the end. It'll be an emotional experience. So, if you haven't seen this movie, do it as this and Marcella Shell are the future of animation, and no modern Disney animated film will convince me otherwise. I'll give Pinocchio the seal cinema.
This is one of the best movies I've seen this year. And not just that, it's one of the best animated films I've seen this decade. This is absolutely one of the most masterfully crafted, um, emotional, funny, and deeply moving films I've seen this entire year. I love how dark they made the new Pinocchio film. That really fit the whole tone of the film. And when you have amazing stop motion animation, terrific voice acting from the cast involved, including Ewan McGregor, Kate Blanchett, as well as the kid that like voiced Pinocchio. And when you have Alessandra and Tilda Swinton, I forgot to mention, as well as Alessandra Desplat's fantastic musical score, fantastic cinematography, the story that feels unique and well executed, excellent directing by Guillermo del Toro, uh, the writing being fantastic, and the ending being one of the most emotional endings I've ever seen in the movie this entire year, as well as the musical numbers being absolutely fantastic and well crafted. Then you know that Guillermo del Toro's Pinocchio is one of the best animated films I've seen this decade, and most importantly, one of the most deeply moving animated films I've seen this entire year. Without a doubt, Guillermo del Toro's Pinocchio is getting a 10 out of 10 or an A plus.
All right, my next one is the mean one. Honestly, this is simply as cheesy and lame as you probably expect when you saw the trailer. The story's predictable, the jump scares are apparent, and it's got some of the worst CGI blood effects you'll ever see. However, I kind of found myself having fun with it due to some fun performances, including from the main one himself and the actress who plays Cindy, as well as some fun kills throughout. So if you're willing to turn your brain off for an hour and a half, bring some friends along and give it a watch, and I'll give it the Derby seal. Next up is get. Next up is the sleeper hit of the year, The Whale. This was an emotional masterpiece if I ever saw one. Darren Aronofsky and Brendan Fraser deserve all the praise for their comebacks, as this was such a tragic yet hopeful story about trying to right the wrongs in life, as well as the dangers of damaging yourself through binging and self isolation. Brendan Fraser needs that Oscar in his hands right now, but the rest of the performances are spectacular, from Han Chow to Sadie Singh to Ty Simpsons, as they try to figure out the problems in their lives as well as try to help the main character get through his problems. Samuel Hunter's writing, which was based on his own play, as well as the cinematography and music, are also A tier. This is hands down one of this year's best, and I'll be shocked if it misses the top three at the end of the year. So go see it and see how impressive, emotional, and important this film is, and I'll give it the seal of cinema.
I'm with Søren. I saw this last Wednesday. Opening day with my opening night with my mom, and this was one of the most powerful, and this was absolutely one of the most powerful, moving, and downright mesmerizing films I have seen this entire year. This is a brilliant character study, unlike the guilt and depression that one goes through after they make after a fatal mistake that he or she made. Seriously, Brendan Fraser gives out one gives out. He's now tied with Colin Farrell in The Banshees of Inisherin as having the best performance I've seen in the movie. Seriously, seriously, the his performance was so spectacular. You feel the emotions of this character and what he went through, and the guilt he was facing, especially with what led him to be like this, and it worked so well. That's why his performance was absolutely spectacular. Not only do Sadie Sink and Ty Simpkins as well as Samantha Morton deliver fantastic performances, but the one that really stood out to me, but the one supporting breakthrough performance that really stood out to me the most was Hong Chow. She plays Liz, who's the nurse of Charlie. She was incredible. This is one of the best breakthrough performances I've seen from an actress this entire year. And you know what? This isn't the only film that she was in that's in my top 10 this year. She's also in another film that's also in my top 10 this year called The Menu. Between this and The Menu, I cannot wait to see what Han Chow is in next. Is going to be in next. I'm especially looking forward to seeing her in that Kelly Reichardt film called Showing Up the very next year when it comes out. The story was fantastic. The script is one of the best of the year since it features amazing dialogue, characters that feel like real people, and a very consistent and the tone that feels very consistent. It's very well directed by Darren Aronofsky. The musical score is both haunting and just the musical score is a haunting and is one of the most haunting musical scores I've heard in the movie this entire year. The cinematography was fantastic. It's very well edited throughout, very well paced, and there are two things in the film that really stood out to me. First off, the makeup. Seriously, whoever did the makeup to make it look like that Brendan Fraser is character is 600 pounds deserves a pat on the back as well as an award for best makeup. The fat suit he wore for the film was absolutely incredible. There was not one single bit where I saw anything fake about the fat suit. It 100% looked real. And throughout the whole and throughout the third act, I had tears coming out of my eyes. But by the time that the emotional ending happened, I could not stop bawling like a baby for like 10 minutes. It was that emotional. That's how emotional the ending was. This is one of Darren Aronofsky's very best movies. And you know what? I need to get this off my chest really quick. Some people, including critics, have been criticizing this movie as being like fat phobic and being like exploitative to like fat people. And I'm like, guys, this is a character study on like the person who went through so much guilt because of a fatal mistake he made. And this is like this like I mean there's a reason why he gained 600 pounds because he made a fatal mistake that ended up scarring him, that ended up being traumatic for him for the rest of his life. So I don't see how this is like fat phobic.
And like Jay Fayer said, it could also be a cautionary tale about the dangers of damaging your body by binge eating.
Exactly. Yes. And look, we're not saying that people that all fat people should lose weight. If you're comfortable with your body, then you feel then go ahead. We're not going to stop you or anything. It's just you need to realize that you do need to realize that the film is really, as Søren put it, is like a cautionary tale of what happens when someone binge eats too much.
And that's not really counting my fan fictions involving cartoon characters gaining weight and inflating or something, because with cartoon characters, we can pretty much do whatever we want with them. This is supposed to be a real life person who is so traumatized that he went down slope such a down slope to the point where he's dying.
Exactly. This is one of the most powerful. This is one of the most powerful and emotional films I've seen this year. It's one of the best films I've seen this year. If it's at a theater near you, do not miss your chance to see The Whale. Do not miss it. It's one of the best films of the year, and I'm definitely going to give The Whale another 10 out of 10 or an A plus. It deserves it. Thank you, Darren Aronofsky and Brendan Fraser.
Our next review is a movie that's been killing it at the box office, but isn't necessarily the greatest film. Avatar: The Way of Water.
Oh boy.
Now, in spite of the first Avatar's massive financial success, it's one of those movies where you either love it or hate it. And as you all know, I'm somewhere down the middle, which is why I was skeptical with this one and all the other three sequels James Cameron's playing out. Ultimately, it's more of the same. Mostly because the story's pretty much the same.
Yeah.
Just as Sully is in a V and has his own family, the bad guy from the first movie got his subconscious uploaded into an avatar like a lawnmower man, and they come across this other tribe with these telepathic whales. But other than that, they have to warn this tribe of the humans who come back to harvest an ultra rare, ultra special element that's exclusive to the planet. Like the first movie, this sequel boasts fantastic visuals, especially when they go underwater to meet the whales. Plus, it
That's
does have
fantastic.
has its fair share of sweeping cinematography and action sequences. Needless to say, far better cinematography and action than half of today's action movies.
Mm-hmm.
But the story's super tried, and the characters don't really have that real development outside the archetypes. So if you like the first Avatar, by all means give it a watch. But if you're an Avatar hater, at least see it once for the pretty visuals, because I don't think James Cameron's lost his sauce as a director per se, but
No.
he's definitely lost his sauce as a screenwriter, as it seems like he's getting a little carried away with these sequels. I'll give Avatar: The Way of Water the seal of accuracy.
For me, Avatar: The Way of Water was okay. The acting is fantastic, especially from Worthington and Sigourney Weaver. I also love the new cast involved. They were fantastic too. The musical score is great. The cinematography is beautiful and one of the best I've seen in the film this entire year. The visual effects are spectacular as always, and the film has excellent action sequences and excellent production design as well. Where the film falters though is its story. I like Søren said, it's the exact same story as the first film. The characters adapted to a new world, or rather a new zone. They train themselves to use their surroundings, interact with the creatures and other characters. One of them screw up everything. Final confrontation on an area based on the element. This time it's water. A lengthy confrontation with the antagonist, and final shot of Jake Sully's eyes. That's literally that's literally the same story as the first. And the biggest problem is that is isn't James Cameron's directing. It's the way James Cameron was like being so obsessed and indulging himself with the world of Pandora and the state of the art special effects that he forgot to focus on original storytelling and good characters. I mean, I mean, it's a fine sequel. I I mean it. I thought Avatar: The Way of Water was okay. And look, I understand why this film needed to be 3 hours long, but holy fucking shit. There are some sequences that just go on and on and on and on to the point where I started to get really bored of this film. And the thing is, I do not mind movies that are long as they keep investing in the story. This year we had films like The Batman and Tar that were long movies, but they had a purpose at being long because of how well detailed they wanted to go for with these stories. And it worked. And they worked very well with it. I can't say the same thing for Avatar: The Way of Water, however. I mean, despite its amazing visual effects and action sequences, great acting, great cinematography, um, excellent musical score, and really good production design. And yes, thank you, Jose. Avengers Endgame. That's another film that needed to be 3 hours long.
Yeah, some of my favorite films are 3 hours long, like Ben Hur or Lord of the Rings.
The Irishman.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's not like we're against movies that are 3 hours long. I mean, you could make a 3 hour long movie, and as long as you make the story interesting, but because of like how the story was like the same thing as the first, I just could not get invested. I just could not get invested in it. It's not a terrible movie. There are some memorable moments here and there, but oh my god, how could I forget about this? The Lord of the Rings. Thank you, Jose.
Yeah, I mentioned that.
Yeah, I can't believe I didn't mention that either. Um, but yeah, Avatar: The Way of Water has spectacular visual effects, and there are some memorable moments here and there. But as a sequel, it was just okay. It was just an okay movie. I probably give it. I had to come. I didn't. I'll be honest. I originally gave it a 5.5 out of 10 or a C plus, but I do praise the film for its visual effects and the cinematography. So that's why I'm going to probably give it a 6 out of 10 or a B minus. It's really just middle of the road.
Speaking of middle of the road, next one is I Want to Dance with Somebody. And honestly, by the numbers is an understatement. There are some decent scenes and good performances, but this movie ironically feels rushed for a 2.5-hour movie, as it just skims through Whitney Houston's life and career without any real depth or tension. You're better off skipping this one, and I'll give it the seal of mediocrity.
This was one of the most disappointing films I sat through this year. Naomi Aki delivers a fantastic performance as Whitney Houston, and Stanley Tucci was great in the film too. All the acting is fantastic. The soundtrack is great too, and the cinematography is fantastic. And there are some brilliantly done musical sequences, but the story was a rushed mess. And and the script and the script as well. And for a movie that's like 2.5 hours long, it felt very rushed. Like they skipped over some of the parts like even although they do show like her a bit of her mental health and how drugs have affected Whitney Houston's mental health. They only show glimpses of it and just focus more on the positive things she's done. Like really guys, really guys, you do realize that she's not a perfect human being, right? Not to say that Whitney Houston, not to say Whitney Houston is a bad person because she's not. Just because they made one mistake in life doesn't mean they're a bad person at all. They made a mistake, and they made a mistake. They own up to it and just move on. That's the thing about what happens when a person makes a mistake in life. But yeah, I just felt the story was so rushed and the story felt so rushed and overall it was just a very disappointing film. And I'm gonna have to give I Want to Dance with Somebody a 5.5 out of 10 or a C plus. It's okay, but for a movie covering this biopic of Whitney Houston, I really expected more from this.
Next up, we got the water world of Oscar films, Babylon. And
Oh
this is one
my
of those
god.
This is one of those movies that split everyone down the middle. Some have called it a well acted love letter to cinema, while others call it an overblown and overindulgent mess. I'm somewhere down the middle. I got what Damien Chazelle is trying to do. Kind of this cautionary tale about the greed and excess of Hollywood celebrities leading to their downfall. It does look nice with great cinematography and production values. The music is great, and it's got this massive cast with Brad Pitt, Margot Robbie, and Diego Calva as standouts. However, this was such a mess. The movie's way too long at 3 hours, with so many scenes that drag out and the story's all over the place. Not to mention it tries to be Wolf of Wall Street with these gross out jokes that are more unnerving than anything. It's not Triangle of Sadness bad because at least it's only a minute or two instead of 15 to 10 minutes straight, and at least Babylon didn't make the elephant shit scene the poster. So, while I can't hate this movie as much as some people like you,
Fucking
Nick,
elephant shit.
it's still not good at the least. I say skip this one in theaters and wait until streaming to decide whether this is pure cinema or pure trash. As for me, still mediocrity.
To say Babylon is one of the year's biggest disappointments would be a huge understatement. I was looking forward to see, knowing how much I'm a fan of Damien Chazelle. Now that I own like Whiplash, La La Land, and First Man on Blu-ray, I was really looking forward to seeing Babylon, knowing that it was going to be a epic period drop dramedy involving the rise and fall of the Hollywood transitions from silent to sound films in the 1920s. But my expectations for the film were very cautious after hearing the polarizing reception it received from both critics and audiences. On one side, they call it a spectacular love letter to Hollywood, but on the other, they call it a self-indulgent mess. And after seeing the film, I was sadly in the latter. It is by far my least favorite film, my least favorite movie from Damien Chazelle, since this is one of the most self-indulgent, disgusting, and inconsistent movies I've seen this entire year. This movie claims to be a love letter to movies and cinema when it's not. It's really more of an anti-love letter to cinema while also being nothing but 3 fucking hours of pure self-indulgent torture. Like it's trying to be the Wolf of Wall Street and Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. But here's one big problem I have with this. When the Wolf of Wall Street and Once Upon a Time in Hollywood both came out before Babylon, and they did it so much better and unique with the way they tell the stories involving excess in Hollywood as well as excess in business. Why do it again? Why do it again in Babylon? I mean, I get this is supposed to be a cautionary tale. Unlike I get this is supposed to be a cautionary tale about greed and excess in the film industry, but here's why this doesn't work. The story was a self-indulgent mess. Damien Chazelle's directing was a muddled mess. And the script he wrote for the film is one of my biggest issues I have with the film. Due to it having dialogue that comes across as being uneven, characters that feel paper thin and underdeveloped, the film relying a bit much on toilet humor, especially this one fucking scene. I knew I was in trouble within the first 3 minutes of the film when we see an elephant literally taking a diarrhea dump, taking a diarrhea dump on the person. And the way they showed an elephant's asshole pooping diarrhea in such a grotesque manner. Like this is fuck beyond belief. The editing was a jumbled. The editing was a muddled mess. It's sluggishly paced. The pacing was all over the place as well. And while I did appreciate the film going all the way with showing the excess of Hollywood, and my main issue is that with it is that there are a few sequences that felt a bit too much, and it went on and on and on to the point where the film was actually testing my patience. And like I stated earlier, to me, And like I stated earlier, to me, it felt like Damien Chazelle was trying to be like the Wolf of Wall Street and Once Upon a Time in Hollywood with the way he did it, and it didn't work, especially when both of those films did it a whole lot better. And oh my god, the ending. This is what I mean, like when I do not feel that this movie is a love letter to cinema. They show clips of like at the end. I'm gonna have to spoil what happens. So I'm gonna have to spoil what happens in this. So spoiler alert. That's your warning. If you don't want to hear what happens at the end, here we go. They show clips of like the Wizard of Oz and Psycho, which for the most part is fine. It does fit the timeline of the era. But then they also show clips of like the Matrix and James Cameron's Avatar, which didn't even exist until years later. Like, what was the point? Like I said, I get it's supposed to be a love letter to cinema, but this is not a love letter. This is not a love letter to cinema. If you want to see a love letter if you want to see a better movie that came out this year that's more of a love letter to cinema, Steven Spielberg's The Fabelmans is your answer. That movie is a love letter to cinema. Babylon is not. The only positives I found with the film were that the acting was terrific. Brad Pitt and Margot Robbie both delivered such wonderful performances in the film. But the one performer that really stuck out to me the most was Diego Calva. He gives out one of the best breakthrough performances I've seen this year as Manny Torres. Seriously, the way he performs that character is nothing short of outstanding, and he's got a bright future ahead of him as an actor. I cannot wait to see what he does next. Not to mention that Justin Hurwitz's musical score is one of the best I've heard in the movie this entire year. I love how he goes for that swing. I love how he goes for that swing and jazz music that he puts in the musical score of his films, and it worked. It works with the tone of the film. It works with the tone of the film, and it fit well with the time period. And the film has excellent production values and costume design. And Linus Sandgren's cinematography was absolutely fantastic, especially with some of the one-take shots that they do, which was absolutely fascinating. Unfortunately, they were not enough to save the film at all. Babylon is by far my least favorite movie from Damien Chazelle, since this is one of the most self-indulgent, disgusting, and inconsistent movies I've seen this entire year, and it is without a doubt one of the most disappointing films I've seen this entire year. Unless you're a huge fan of Damien Chazelle, Margot Robbie, or Brad Pitt, I would not recommend seeing Babylon in theaters. And it really breaks my heart that this is the first Damien Chazelle film I saw that is not worth your time. I'm sorry, but I'm going to have to give Babylon a 3 out of 10 or a D+. I'm sorry, Damien Chazelle, but this was not good. I do appreciate what you did, but this was not good, man. I'm sorry.
My final movie review is Matilda the Musical. This was a fun as hell musical adaptation with great performances, including Alicia Weir as a titular character and an unrecognizable Emma Thompson as the ruthless villain. A toe-tapping soundtrack taken straight from the musical and a ton of emotion. This is a fantastic start for Netflix's partnership with the Walt Disney universe, and I'll give it a seal of approval.
All right, so that means I'm next with the last two movie reviews. My first one I'm going to talk about, it's based on the 2017 memoir of the same name called Spoiler Alert. It's an LGBT romantic drama that stars Jim Parsons from The Big Bang Theory, Ben Ben Ulrich and Oscar winner Sally Field in the story. Excuse me. In the story of two lovers, one who catches the other's final months before their death from terminal cancers. While the film does, while the films, while I did feel the film suffered through some predictability as well as a couple of pacing issues here and there, and there were a couple editing choices made in the film that came up as being a bit uneven. I surprisingly found spoiler alert to be a really enjoyable romantic drama featuring terrific performances and chemistry by Jim Parsons and Ben Ulrich. The director of the film, Michael Showalter, who did two previous independent movies, which were Hello, My Name is Doris, and The Big Sick, which was one of the best films I saw from 2017. He did a very good job with the way he directed this movie. He did a very good job. I was a little worried though, since his previous movie, The Eyes of Tammy Faye, was okay, but a disappointingly Oscar-baiting movie. That, spoiler alert, would be one of those movies where it was clearly rushed out just to be Oscar bait. But thankfully, that wasn't the case. Instead, what I got with spoiler alert was a surprisingly enjoyable romantic drama that does a very good job handling its LGBT subject, since the two main characters are more than just friends. Since you really do feel that the two main characters are more than just friends. And the ending was surprisingly emotional too, despite its predictability. I overall really liked spoiler alert, and I give it an 8 out of 10 or a B plus. Next film I'm going to talk about is one of the best independent movies. Not just one of the best independent movies I've seen this year, but one of the best films I've seen this year too. It's called Aftersun. It stars Paul Mescal, and it's written and directed by Charlotte Wells, and it takes place in the late 1990s as we follow Sophie, an 11-year-old Scottish girl on vacation with her father at a Turkish resort on the eve of his 31st birthday. I didn't know what to expect going into Aftersun, other than the fact that I've been hearing countless praises for the film, saying that this is one of the best movies that this is one of the best films of the decade and one of the best movies ever made. And I really loved Aftersun. While I don't personally feel it's the best movie of 2022, as some are saying, since my only minor flaw I have with the film was how some of the editing choices in the film came up as being a bit uneven at times. That still didn't change how I felt about Aftersun, since it features one of the best breakthrough performances I've seen this year, is by Paul Mescal. Seriously, what a performance he gave in the film. He plays the main character who's the dad of this little girl, and you named Callum, and you see what he goes through throughout the entire film. It's really hard to review this movie without going into spoilers, so I'm going to try to keep it brief with this one. All I can say is this movie did a terrific job with the way it handled the subject of like depression and grief. I was very impressed with the way it handled depression and grief I've seen on film, especially since, according to this one reviewer, it meditates on childhood, parenthood, and memory. And while I didn't necessarily cry at the ending, I did feel depressed and sorry for not only Sophie, but for Callum as well. Seriously, how Charlotte Wells wrote and directed this movie was absolutely fantastic. She makes characters feel like real people, and the dialogue was absolutely incredible too. The cinematography is fantastic. The soundtrack is wonderful. It's very well edited, very well paced, and the ending, like I stated before, is one of the most emotional endings I've ever seen in the movie this entire year. It is a slow movie for it being 100 minutes long, but the slow burn pace actually worked for me, given how it fit the tone, atmosphere, and realism of the film. And that's why the slow burn pace in this movie worked for me. I really loved Aftersun. I cannot wait to see what Charlotte Welch does after seeing this movie, because what she's crafted here is one of the most emotionally devastating, yet thought-provoking and deeply moving films I've seen this entire year. If it's at a theater near you, or if you have this on demand, please give Aftersun a watch. It's one of the best films I've seen this year, and I'm going to give Aftersun a very enthusiastic 9.5 out of 10 or an A. One of the best films of the year. Charlotte Wells, I cannot wait to see what you do next.
All right, now with those reviews out of the way, time for the main event. Now, it's safe to say that this year sucked, not just for gas prices, not just for Ukraine, not just for inactivity on my YouTube and DVR accounts, but for movies as a whole. This was a year that proved that no matter how bad some Hollywood movies are, Hollywood audiences will always flock to movie theaters to see the next Jurassic World or Avatar or anything that's safe and marketable.
To say that 2022 was one of the most depressing. Sorry.
Like A24 and Focus features either underperforming or straight up bombing. This is also the year of bullcrap controversy, from complaining that Turning Red, Lightyear, and Strange World were too woke instead of actually talking about the actual flaws with those films, to Billy Eichner claiming that Bros bombed because of white people, to the aforementioned The Whale being bashed for being sizes for some reason. But this year truly lacked in really great movies, as most of them I've seen this year range from okay to average to straight up bad. But now we're going to talk about the bad movies. And since I stay reserved when it comes to seeing awful movies this year, this is going to be a top 10 list instead of a top 15 we did last year.
Yeah, originally I was planning to do a top 15, but due to the fact that Søren wants to do a top 10, I decided, you know what, let's why not do a top 10? So as for my thoughts on 2022 in film, to say that 2022 was one of the most depressing years I've ever had to get through as a movie reviewer would be a big understatement. Minus Everything Everywhere All at Once and Top Gun Maverick, there were a number of critically acclaimed movies that unfortunately didn't do well at the box office. Yet most of the mediocre to downright terrible movies have done well at the box office, which shows everything wrong with audiences today, mostly casual audiences. Worst of all, this year presented its worst traits, such as action movies that rely too much on quick cut edits to the point where you can't even tell what the hell is even going on in some scenes. Films such as Moonfall, Thor: Love and Thunder, Black Adam, and The Gray Man going overboard with their 100 million to 250 million dollar budget by throwing in some of the worst visual effects I've ever seen put on screen. Some good directors like Damien Chazelle, Alex Garland, Taika Waititi, Anthony and Joe Russo, Sam Mendes, Olivia Wilde, and David O. Russell embarrassing themselves with the bad movie they made this year. Some filmmakers, including Chazelle, Garland, Wilde, and Russell, being so self-indulgent with the films they made. And the worst being that minus Bros, She Said, and even though I haven't seen Women Talking yet, I heard great things about that film. The film this year in film focused way too much on the obvious shoehorn in political undertones. And that's really one of the biggest reasons why I just could not love James Gray's Armageddon Time. And one last big problem. This year, as Søren stated, this year focused way too much on like unnecessary controversies and review bombings. Like whether it's Turning Red, Bros, or The Woman King, or some type of nonsense, including what Søren and I just explained earlier with The Whale, which was complete bullshit. This year in film was just really, really depressing to get through.
And Jose, don't even get me started, Mr. Enter. I did an entire review bashing his review.
Oh my god, don't even get me started on that either. Yeah, so this year in film was a really tough one. It was really, really tough to get through. But thank God the year is almost over because Soren and I are going to review our list of the top 10 worst movies that we both saw in 2022. These were the movies that we hated so much with the burning passion that they deserve to rotten hell and never be seen. But before we talk about the 10 worst movies that we saw this year, we're going to go over our dishonorable mentions real quick.
As for
Soren, why don't
my
you go?
As for my dishonorable mentions, I admit I kind of went overboard last year, so I'm only gonna list the movies I gave the seal of disapproval, including Jurassic World Dominion, a movie that tried to be the Avengers Endgame of the franchise, yet being about as worthless as the Rise of Skywalker. Amsterdam, which was supposed to be David Russell's big comeback, but it was just ruined by a boring story, a clusterfuck of a tone, and the fact that David Russell himself is, excuse my French, nothing more than a husband cunt.
Yeah, really. I'll talk about him in a little bit when I get to like my top 10.
Alex Garland's Men. This movie tried to be a creepy haunted house movie meets social commentary, misogyny, but it was just a mess. Beast, starring Idris Elba, his born daughters, and crappy CGI lions straight out the Sci-Fi Channel. Where the Crawdads Sing combined the mean-spiritedness
Sorry
of No
about that.
Such Luck in a shitty romance film if Lincoln actually did to Lynn what Chief did to Jack Nicholson at the end of Cuckoo's Nest. Spoiler alert. And the final pick that missed the list, After Ever Happy. I could put it on the list, but it was almost as bad as I was expecting, so it's got itself for the participation trophy. Then again, to quote Jasper Pye, those participation trophies are nothing but lies. And the fact that it, and the fact that the 10 that made the list had a lot more, and the fact is, the 10 that actually made the list had a lot more potential. Hence why I just can't put After Ever Happy on the list.
As for my dishonorable mentions are excuse me, Damien Chazelle's Babylon, Fantastic Beasts: The Secrets of Dumbledore, Beast, Death on the Nile, Thor: Love and Thunder, Empire of Light, directed by Sam Mendes, Alex Garland's Men, Peter Fairley's on The Greatest Beer Run Ever, Andrew Dominic's Blonde, My Policeman, Paws of Fury, The Legend of Hank, aka Blazing Samurai, as it was originally called, Black Adam, Uncharted, Alice, Emancipation, Olivia Wilde's Don't Worry, Darling,
You see it on my list?
The 355,
It's
Where
on
the
my
Cry-
list.
Where the Crawdads Sing, The Gray Man, and finally, you're going to be surprised that this is not in the top 10, Soren, James Ponsol's Summering.
As always, on to the top 10 worst films of 2022, or as I like to call it, the 10 movies I somehow hated more than the Ice Age Adventures of Buckworld. So to quote Bane, let the games begin.
Let's do it.
Coming in at number 10, who thought a movie by the Russo brothers would actually be worse than the After sequel this year, The Gray Man? You know, it's pretty ironic that a movie that cost $200 million to make would look and feel so cheap and with unimpressive CGI and action sequences. The actors like Ryan Gosling and Anna de Armas are okay, but it's obvious they don't want to be in this movie and are just wondering what the hell they're doing here. And it's obvious that people are wondering why the Russo brothers could go from four of the greatest comic book films of the past 10 years to making Cherry, which is average, and now this. Let's just hope the next movie turns out to be better with them. Please direct Secret Wars. So yeah, The Gray Man is not a good way to kick off the worst of the year.
My number 10 is the worst comedy I've seen in 2022, and the first time in a while that a comedy really tested my patience. It's called Easter Sunday.
That
Easter
looks pretty bad.
Søren, this movie was just so bad. It was so bad. Easter Sunday is the worst comedy I've seen in 2022, since this is one of the lousiest and most annoying, idiotic, and reprehensible movies I've seen this entire year. And I feel bad for Joe Coy, since he is a talented comedian. It's too bad that the original story he had for the film landed in the wrong hands of the wrong filmmaker and writers. The only positives I have with the film were that there are a couple good performances by Tiffany Haddish, although she's not credited in the film, and Lou Diamond Phillips. The cinematography was very good, and there were at least 2 to 3 jokes that did make me laugh, but that's sadly it. The story not only felt cliched, but also very poorly structured due to it feeling more like a TV sitcom than a theatrical movie. The script was downright atrocious due to it having terrible dialogue, characters that come across as being cliched and one-dimensional bumbling idiots rather than feeling like real people. I know it's a comedy, but when it's taking place in the real world, yet the characters do not feel real at all due to them acting like obnoxious cartoon characters, then it doesn't work. And speaking of the comedy, what is a comedy supposed to do? Make you laugh. But when the audience is not laughing at most of the jokes, then you basically fail as a comedy. And Easter Sunday is no exception, since 93% of the jokes throughout the entire film fall very flat due to them coming across as being idiotic and juvenile, especially this one scene which I could not stand. It is where they're shooting for Joe Coy and his character and his friend are shooting for a commercial, and he fucking dabs in front of the camera. Because get it? Joe Coy's character dabs in front of the camera while shooting for the commercial? Do you get it, you stupid audience? God, first scoop and now this. Really?
At least Avengers Endgame was kind of self-aware with its dabbing.
Yeah, really. Same thing with Us. Jordan Peele's Us.
Yeah.
Excuse me. What's even worse about most of these jokes is that some of them felt too extreme, especially with the way the jokes involve a cliche car chase sequence and the mob going after Eugene just because he didn't pay them their money. I seriously want to know what the hell the writers of the film were thinking when they even wrote those jokes. Also, it didn't surprise me that this is from the director of Super Troopers and The Dukes of Hazzard, which, although the first Super Troopers movie is one of my biggest guilty pleasures, I hated the sequel, and I especially hated The Dukes of Hazzard. And the way he directed this movie came up as being both messy and redundant. The rest of the acting was terrible. It wasted talents of Joe Coy and Tia Carrere, while everyone, including Eugene Cordero and and the guy that directed this movie and was also in Super Troopers, annoyed the crap out of me in this movie. The soundtrack was also an obnoxious mess. The editing and pacing were all over the place. And not only does the film go for those cliches that we've seen in other films before, but what really bothered me about this movie is that Easter Sunday was trying to be like Crazy Rich Asians with how they portray Filipino people and their culture, but it didn't work due to the story being so poorly structured. If you're going to portray people in a different culture, do it in a realistic, clever, relatable, and respectful manner. Yet it felt like they didn't even do so, especially when the story came up as being more of a TV sitcom rather than a theatrical movie, as I stated earlier. And because of that, it just didn't work. Overall, Easter Sunday is one of the lousiest and most annoying, idiotic, and reprehensible movies I've seen this year, and that's why it is my number 10 worst film I saw in 2022.
My number 9 is the first movie I ever saw this year, and boy, did it set tone, and boy, did it end this franchise on a sour note. My number 9 is Hotel Transylvania 4 Transformania. Look, I'm not saying the original 3 films are the Godfather trilogy of animation, because that distinction would go to the Toy Story movies, but that's just me. But I enjoyed them for what they were. The first 2 movies were solid enough as they were, and even though this third movie was okay, this movie had at least had this movie had a chance to redeem this franchise, and it did the complete opposite. And I'm not saying that you need Jenny Tartakovsky or Adam Sandler back to make a good movie, because a movie where Johnny turns into a monster and the monsters turn into humans could have worked if you had a better script. Maybe dive into the themes of morality and the juxtaposition of Johnny being the perfect family man, while at the same time being morbid compared to his wife and kid. But no, what are we getting instead? A cliched lie reveal story where Dracula forgets he learned to like Johnny in film 1 and still hates him, even though he let Mary's daughter and produced a kid in the second film. And Johnny was kind of an airhead in the first 3 movies, and here he's just straight up stupid. Stupid to a point that instead of laying Mavis or Dennis by his hand in order to become a monster, to convince Dracula to give him the hotel because of some lie, he somehow trusts Van Helsing to zap him with his magic crystal, which may remind you that A, he was the main villain of the last movie, so it's kind of sporadic that he's trusting this quickly, and B, Van Helsing could have used that crystal to zap the monsters to humans back when he was a monster hunter that entire time. Not that the rest of the characters were well utilized. Mavis was okay, but the remaining monsters are just one freaking joke each, which wasn't even funny the first time, and then it got worse and worse the more they were on screen. There's a way like barely in this movie and decide one dumbass gag where Dracula hypnotized them to forget about Johnny's shenanigans, which by the way is in my thumbnail. Even though the second movie clearly said that monsters are him to hypnosis. Seriously, that made no fucking sense. The animation's a downgrade. The animation's just a downgrade. The first 2 movies had this great balance between gothic and cartoony, yet these last 2 movies rely more on the cartoony than the gothic, and it seriously looks cheap. And all that would be bad enough, but I also had to have the most infuriating ending of the entire year.
I heard how bad that ending was.
Okay, not as bad as Submarine because at least they resolved the main plot, and I'll get to that, and I'll get to Submarine in the top 2, but this is the second worst. Basically, after the guys get back from that dying Indiana Jones adventure, spoiler alert, but who cares? You shouldn't see this movie. They all of a sudden see the hotel being demolished by this giant monster that was barely established throughout the film. And yet that doesn't result in a single causality, but whatever. Anyway, so Mavis and Johnny are left to fix the hotel, and they just feel the exact same way like nothing happened.
Are you fucking kidding me? That's the best they could do?
Hold on.
I don't believe this.
Hold on. Let me just make this a little louder. Here we go again.
Holy shit! I can't believe you did this to me, goddammit! How could you do this to me?
Let's just agree that fan fiction I did on my DeviantArt account is fucking Ben-Hur compared to this nonsense, because this movie truly is the Shrek the Third of Sony Animation. Yet this is even worse than that, because this is supposed to be a conclusion to this franchise. Especially since Shrek ended on a good way with Shrek Forever After, but that's another story. And the sad thing is, this wouldn't be the last time Sony made a vampire movie that shut the bed, but we'll get to that later. But for now, Hotel Transylvania 4 is my number 9.
All right. sorry. I'm sorry. I'm still kicking over that. Anyway, my number 9. What were they thinking when they thought of ending this?
Speaking of shitty franchise conclusions,
Yeah, you guys saw this coming. Number 9 is Halloween Ends. This is not only worse than Halloween Kills, which was a huge disappointment in my eyes, but it's also one of the most boring, idiotic, and inconsistent movies I've seen this entire year. This is one of those movies where it does have some good ideas in there involving serial killers and trauma, but the problem is that those themes go absolutely nowhere due to the structure of the film's story being poorly executed. The only redeeming things I found in the film were that Jamie Lee Curtis and Will Patton both delivered some very good performances in the film, and the film does have a very good cinematography and one creative kill involving the tongue being slashed off that was like fantastic. But otherwise, that's it. The story was nothing more than a muddled and inconsistent mess. Sorry, let me rephrase that. The story was nothing more than a muddled and inconsistent mess, since rather than focusing on Laurie Strode taking down Michael Myers, they focus more on a shoehorned-in love story between Allison and the psychopath Corey Cunningham that takes up nearly half the movie. And the showdown between Laurie Strode and Michael Myers and the showdown between Laurie Strode and Michael Myers doesn't even come in until towards the end of the film. And when they do eventually show the showdown, sure, it's satisfying to see Laurie Strode finally kill Michael Myers. But here's the problem: it didn't feel all that earned. Sure, it was satisfying, but it didn't feel all that earned at all. It was just there. It was just like, okay, Michael Myers is dead. Bye to him. He caused so much shit. Who cares? Who fucking cares? Not only is David Gordon Green's directing a muddled mess, but the script that he, along with Paul Brad Logan, Chris Bernier, and Danny McBride wrote for the film is one of the worst of the year due to it not only having bland dialogue, shallow character development, a very inconsistent tone, and shoehorn-in humor, but some of the decisions made in the film that completely pissed me off to no end. The first being, I'm spoiling the shit out of this movie. Fuck it. It is the worst of lists, so I'm spoiling it. The first being that when Michael Myers shows up halfway through the film in the sewer, he looks into Corey's eyes and sees the pain he's been going through for being ridiculed by the townspeople after he was accused of killing a boy named Jeremy because he was supposed to babysit towards the beginning of the film, which I should mention. That scene was so very predictable. It was very predictable. Even despite how shocking it was still predictable. And what does Michael Myers do to Corey? Does he kill him? Nope. He lets him go instead, and he and Corey eventually team up afterwards.
Yep, they basically pulled a Don't Breathe 2 on this guy on making the villain the hero.
Hold on. I'm trying to pull up this clip. I'm trying to pull up this clip to describe my feelings towards this. In the words of the angry video game nerd, Hold on.
What the fuck were they thinking?
And even though I found Transformania to be a worse movie, at least it stuck to its core on its franchise conclusions, unlike this one and the certain one that Nick will get to in his top two.
This doesn't make any sense because as a villain, Michael Myers is an unstoppable killing machine who is unable to feel any sympathy or compassion at all. Why, after 40 years, does Michael Myers feel compassion and sympathy? But if you thought that was bad, there's another plot point decision in the film that was written that really angered me to no end. And it was where the people blame Laurie Strode for thinking that she was the reason why Michael Myers is out there terrorizing the town. Yet they didn't even realize that Laurie Strode warned everyone about Michael Myers years ago. Who thought that was a good idea? And who on earth thought that would be frustrating for not only fans of Halloween and horror, but to the audience in general? Who thought that was a good idea? The rest of the acting was terrible. The actress that played Allison, as well as Rowan Campbell and Kyle Richards, are horribly wasted in this movie due to how poorly written their characters felt. But the worst performance in the film easily goes to Michael Barbieri as Terry Tramer, who's the leader of the gang of bullies. Not only was his performance completely shallow, but he was so annoying in this movie that I actually yelled, "Shut the hell up" on my computer screen as I was watching it. The musical scored by John Carpenter and his son Cody, as well as Daniel Daniel Davies, felt shallow and forgettable. The editing was all over the place. For a movie that's 111 minutes long, the film's pacing was a sluggish mess since it felt like it was going on for 2.5 hours. The tension feels non-existent. And not only does the film have its share of cliches that we've seen in other films before, but even despite the final showdown between Michael Myers and Laurie Strode being satisfying and fun to watch, that still didn't change the fact that this movie has one of the most underwhelming and anticlimactic endings I've seen on film this entire year. Overall, Halloween Ends isn't just one of the worst Halloween movies I've ever seen, as well as an unsatisfying conclusion to what could have been a solid trilogy. It's also one of the most boring, idiotic, and inconsistent movies I've seen this entire year. And that's why Halloween Ends is my number 9 worst film I saw in 2022. Fuck this movie and just let the franchise die already. You killed it enough.
Yeah. My number 8 is a movie that I forgot even came out, and that is The Bubble. John Patel, what were you thinking? You made some of the greatest comedies of the last 20 years, like 4-Year-Old Virgin, Knocked Up, and The King of Staten Island. And while this story was average, I thought that was going to be the worst of his movies, until this one came around. This movie tried to be an ensemble comedy, less like Tropic Thunder meets a pandemic, but the actors are completely wasted, and it was just boring and unfunny, since they had to rely on too much on the gross out humor I hate about these kinds of movies. So yeah, The Bubble is my number 8, and I hope Jaya Patel's next movie is way better.
Hold on, let me. Sorry about that. I had to pull up this clip really quick because of what I'm about to explain with my number 8. My number 8 is not only the year's biggest disappointment, but the worst comeback I've ever seen from a filmmaker who has made some good movies like American Hustle, Silver Linings Playbook, and The Fighter, and Flirting with Disaster, and I Heart Huckabees. Yep, you guys know where I'm going with this. Number 8 is Amsterdam.
Dear Russell, please stop trying.
After seeing this movie and after reading the controversy over the film, my respect for David O. Russell has now gone down the drain. Amsterdam isn't just the worst movie I've seen from David O. Russell. It's also one of the most horribly misguided, convoluted, boring, frustrating, and downright inconsistent movies I've seen this entire year. This is one of those movies where it had no idea what it wanted to be due to how convoluted the story felt, and as a result, it not only becomes a waste of time for the audience, but a huge missed opportunity for everybody involved. The only redeeming things I found in the film were that Emmanuel Lubezki's cinematography was fantastic, and the film does have amazing production values and costume design as well, since it feels like you're back in the 1930s, but that's it. The story was a self-indulgent mess. The story was a self-indulgent and convoluted mess. Since due to it having no idea what it wanted to be whatsoever, and not only was David O. Russell's directing a horrendously muddled mess, but the script he wrote for the film is one of the very worst of the year, since it's also a self-indulgent mess. Other than the characters, sorry. Other than the script having terrible dialogue and characters that feel paper thin and forgettable, the biggest problem I have with the script is that it thinks it's so clever with the way the film has its quirky tone. Well, no, it isn't. Well, no, it isn't clever. It's not clever. And the sad thing is, David O. Russell has done well with putting quirky tones in movies before, but I have no idea what he was thinking when he thought of having other characters being mean-spirited to the three main leads would be considered quirky and funny. And speaking of leads, I have this one question about the acting in Amsterdam. How in the bleeding hell do you have actors like Christian Bale, Margot Robbie, John David Washington, Chris Rock, Anya Taylor-Joy, Zoe Saldana, Mike Myers, Michael Shannon, Timothy Oliphant, Andrea Riseborough, Taylor Swift, Matthias Schoenaerts, Alessandro Nivola, Rami Malek, and fucking Robert De Niro try their best in the film, yet have their talents be horribly wasted due to how poorly written their characters felt? How is that even possible? Musical score was nothing but a scrambled mess, since it tried way too hard to be quirky. The editing was all over the place, and not only did I feel that the film was 25 minutes too long, since it's 134 minutes long, but the pacing was also a sluggish mess since it felt like it was going on for 3.5 hours. It's also very predictable when it came to the mystery element on who killed Taylor Swift's character, set the three main leads up for a crime they didn't commit. Spoiler alert, it was Timothy Oliphant's character, Taran Milfats, who could have saw that coming. And it definitely has its share of cliches that we've seen in other murder mystery films before. Nothing was original or unique about it. And how this movie even cost $80 million to make is completely baffling. Overall, Amsterdam is easily the worst film I've seen from David O. Russell, since this is one of the most horribly misguided, convoluted, boring, frustrating, and downright inconsistent movies I've seen this entire year. And that's why David O. Russell's Amsterdam is the 8th worst movie I saw in 2022. And before Søren moves on to number 7, I have my message to David O. Russell. David O. Russell, you should not only be ashamed of yourself for making this disaster, but for all the shit you caused to these actors and actresses, both on set and off set. You need to stop what you're doing, and in the words of Michael Jordan, sorry. And in the words of Michael Jordan in that PSA commercial,
so don't blow it. Don't do drugs. If you're doing it, stop it. Get some help. McDonald's wants you to give yourself a chance. A a chance to find out all the
Wrong clip. I'm sorry. Yeah. Deborah Russell, please, for the love of God.
Stop it. Get some help.
And in the words of Spike.Marv.
Adventures in another dimension.
Yeah, okay, whatever. Nobody really cares.
Nobody cares, but I saved the entire multiverse from a giant.
Nobody cares, Applejack.
But I.
Nobody cares, you stupid cunt. Shut your fucking mouth. Oh my god.
Jeez.
Shut up. A million times shut up. I'm going to kill you.
Yeah,
Shut up.
really.
Nobody cares.
Yes, seriously, Deborah Russell, please stop trying.
Just stop. Get help. Get help.
Number 7 is a movie that I completely forgot about, Blacklight. It's safe to say that Liam Neeson thrills are hit or miss, and this was a complete miss. Story and characters are all stuff you've seen before, and this is such a boring mess that even Liam walking around this movie wanted to walk off the set. Honestly, you're better off watching Martin Campbell's Memory that same year, because I recently rewatched it and surprisingly holds up as a movie of this kind of caliber. Because anything's better than Blacklight, which is my number 7.
The next two films at 7 through 6 are both horror films. And although they're not the worst of the year, I'm going to get to that at number 4, they are both some of the most boring and cliched horror movies I've seen this entire year. Starting up with one of them at number 7 is The Invitation. Can we please, for the love of God, get a good horror movie involving vampires next time, and not this whole Twilight or like any other cliched vampire bullshit. It's not the worst horror film I've seen this entire year, but that doesn't excuse The Invitation from being one of the most boring, cliched, and repetitive horror movies I've seen this entire year. It's one of those movies where it tries to be like Bram Stoker's Dracula mixed with Get Out and Ready or Not, but it fails on so many levels due to how poorly structured the film felt. The only two redeeming things I found in the film were that Natalie Emmanuel delivers a very good performance as Evie, and she was by far the best thing in the whole film. And the production design on the castle mansion was very good, since it gave it a more gothic-like atmosphere. But that's it. The story was an inconsistent and repetitive mess. The script is one of the worst of 2022 due to it having characters that feel paper thin and one-dimensional, to the point where you don't give a rat's ass about any of them, as well as having bland dialogue. I was also very disappointed in the direction by Jessica M. Thompson, since it came up as being nothing more than a muddled mess. The acting was terrible. The rest of the acting was terrible, including Thomas Doherty, who, as Walter DeVille, came up as being nothing but a one-dimensional cartoon character. Sean Pertwee, who I really like and feel is a very talented actor, is horribly wasted in this movie. The musical score felt dull and forgettable. The cinematography was also reprehensibly dull. It's clumsily edited, poorly paced, and not only does the film have its share of predictability, as well as a very underwhelming ending, but the most fatal flaw I have with this movie is that nothing, and I mean almost nothing, happens throughout the entire film. And when something does happen, what do they rely on? Jump scares!
Wow, I'm so scared right now. Can't you see by the tone of my voice?
Seriously, how many fucking times do I need to say this about jump scares in movies? If you're going to do a jump scare in a movie, you need to build tension. But when you're doing jump scares just for the sake of it, then you're ruining the tension you're trying to go for in this movie, since it feels non-existent. Not only that, but you could predict the jump scares in this movie coming from a mile away, which also ruined the tension the Invitation was even trying to go for in the first place. Yeah, The Invitation is overall one of the most boring, cliche, and repetitive horror movies I've seen this year, and that's why it is my number 7.
Number 6 is what happens when you take the Stepperwise. When the Stepperwise gets a facelift that is somehow more likable, well, then will the remake of Stepperwise, which is Don't Worry Darling. This movie has a director who has a cult hit, Booksmart, a mostly proven cast, and an intriguing premise about the suburban town having these creepy undertones. But what really brings it down is the story. Olivia Wilde is trying too hard to be shocking and deep with her direction, when in reality is boring and pretentious. The screenplay is such a boring match which just leaves you with more questions than answers, and Harry Styles gives up one of the most laughable and Razzie-worthy performances since Tommy Wiseau in The Room.
Yeah, really.
So yeah, that's pretty much why Don't Worry Darling is my number 6 worst.
Number 6, I already mentioned another horror film that would be on the list, and it's on here. When will Hollywood stop releasing movies, these cliched horror movies involving exorcism? When will they stop making movies that we've seen in other horror films before, including the original masterpiece by William Friedkin, The Exorcist? Number 6 is Pray for the Devil. Pray for the Devil is one of the lousiest and most cliched, boring, and reprehensible horror movies I've seen this entire year. This is a movie where it relies so much on cliches that you've seen in other horror films before and does nothing new with its premise that you can't help but feel pissed off and feel like they didn't even try with this. The only redeeming thing I found in the film was that Jacqueline Byers does deliver a good performance as Sister Anne. But that's it. The story not only felt cliche, but also messy and forgettable. The reason I feel that is because it does nothing new with the story and concept whatsoever, and as a result, you can't help but ask this question: how many times have we seen movies involving exorcism before? Seriously,
Too many.
Yeah, really. Not to mention that Robert Zapp, not to mention the script is one of the worst of the year due to it having bland dialogue and terrible character development. The directing was sadly a muddled mess. The rest of the acting was terrible. It wastes the talents of Virginia Madsen and Ben Cross, while Colin Salmon, Christian Navarro, Nicholas Ralph, and especially Posey Taylor. I really don't want to pick on kid actors since I know they're trying, but I can't help but feel like that she, along with the others, just give out such bland and shallow performances. Especially since Posey Taylor, especially the way they set up Posey Taylor's character, like she's trying to be like Linda Blair from The Exorcist, and it just didn't work. The musical score felt shallow and forgettable. The cinematography was a dull mess. The editing was all over the place. And even for a movie that clocks in at 87 minutes, this is one of the most poorly paced movies I've seen this entire year, since it felt like it was going on for 2.5 hours. And not only does the film have its share of cliches that you've seen in other films before, but like The Invitation, it relies on those fucking jump scares. It's like I said before. If you're going to rely on jump scares, you need to build tension. If you're going to have if you're going to have a jump scare in a movie, but you guys get the point. When it's jump scares just for the sake of it, it ruins the tension you're even trying to go for. And Pray for the Devil definitely falls into the latter because of that, and due to the fact that you can predict every single jump scare in this movie coming from a mile away, which also ruins the tension that Pray for the Devil was even trying to go for in the first place. Overall, Pray for the Devil is one of the lousiest and most cliche, boring, and reprehensible horror movies I've seen this entire year. It's not the worst horror film I've seen this year, but we'll get to that at number 4. But yeah, Pray for the Devil is easily my number 6.
Oh boy, my 5 seals of rage. My next movie, Roland Emmerich, please stop making movies. My number 5 is Moonfart. It was very bad enough that he had to be one of those hipsters claiming that Marvel and Star Wars have ruined the film industry, but that comment is completely contradictory since all he's done for the past 25 years, besides making these Oscar bait films that range from good to forgettable to complete garbage, is try to recapture the success of Independence Day over and over and over again. How I know this is because these same movies are just the exact same worldwide destruction porn we're all sick and tired of. Day After Tomorrow, 2012, White House Down, Resurgence, and now this movie. The characters are all the same with nothing unique. The effects and action sequences are a complete mess, and the blatant secret big ending is never going to happen due to this movie bombing harder than, well, Earth and his disaster movies.
Yeah, really.
Roland, just retire at this point, as you've lost your spark of magic, as Moonfall is my number 5.
Oh boy, the 5 zeros I gave this year. Coming in at number 5 is one of the worst family movies I've ever seen in my entire life. This came out in January, and it was one of those films that was delayed so many times. And yet, this is one of those movies where I really wish they either released it straight to DVD or straight to TV, because this is absolutely one of the most reprehensible movies one of the most reprehensible family movies I've ever seen in my life. Number 5 is The King's Daughter. Oh God, The King's Daughter. Seriously, what were they thinking with this? I couldn't find anything redeeming in this movie whatsoever. So let's talk about why I hated this movie. Straight to streaming too. Thank you, thank you, Jose. I couldn't find anything redeeming in this movie whatsoever. So let's talk about why I hated this movie. First off, the story was all over the place. Not only was the story all over the place, but the script is one of the worst of the year due to it having terrible dialogue, terrible character development. Second, the directing by Sean McNamara was absolutely atrocious, since he had no clear idea of what he's even trying to go for. The acting was terrible. Third, the acting was terrible. Not only does Pierce Brosnan, who I really like and think is a really talented actor, give out one of his worst performances as King Louis XIV, but he also has one of the fakest looking Wades I've ever seen in a movie. Like, who thought that was a good idea? Seriously, I want to know who thought that was a good idea to give it one of the fakest looking Wades I've ever seen in the movie. It also wastes the talents of Chaos Scaldario, the late William Hurt in his final appearance. Rest in peace, dude. And Rachel Griffiths. The soundtrack is nothing but a dated joke, especially when you have out of place modern day K-pop playing in the background in a movie that takes place in the 19th century.
Seriously, you're not Moulin Rouge.
Yeah, really. The cinematography was nothing but a glossy mess. The editing was all over the place, since you can't even tell what the hell is even going on in some scenes. The production values and costume design don't look all that impressive, since they look like something you would find something in a presentation that's located in a theme park. And not only was the film's pacing a sluggish mess, but the biggest glaring issue I have with the film are just CGI effects. Good Lord. What were they thinking with this? the CGI visual effects are some of the worst I've ever experienced in a movie this entire year, especially since some of them, especially the mermaid, look like something that came out of an outdated PS1 game. It's that bad. Yeah, overall, The King's Daughter is one of the worst family movies I've seen in my life, and one of the most boring, inconsistent, and reprehensible movies I've seen this entire year. And that's why it is my number 5.
Number 4 is the first movie. My number 4 is the first movie to even come out this year, and this was not a good way to start off. My number 4 is the 355. This movie just feels like another girl power saves the world movie. Despite the actors trying, the characters are all forgettable. Not to mention, it suffers from the worst action sequences you've seen in a while, as the camera work and editing aren't even trying. There's not really much more to this movie, as it didn't try hard enough to anger me that much. But this is essentially why the 355 is on the list and my number 4.
My number 4, I already hinted what the worst horror film of the year is, and yeah, might as well get into it. Number 4, Firestarter. Look, say what you want about the 1984 film starring Drew Barrymore, but at least it stayed faithful. At least it tried to stay faithful to the novel that the flick was based on, and it was at least a fun film to watch. With this remake, though, it felt like they didn't even try at all. I'm not even kidding when I tell you that Firestarter is one of the worst horror movies I've ever seen in my entire life, and one of the worst remakes I've ever seen as well. Not only is it something that we've seen in other films before, but this is one of those movies where it clearly did not know what it wanted to be, and as a result, just came up as being nothing more than a discount version of Carrie, which ironically is another story written by Stephen King that had been adapted into 2 theatrical movies in 1976 and 2013, as well as a TV movie in 2002, I should add, but that's besides the point. With the sprinkle of a discount version of X-Men mixed in. The story is nothing but a muddled mess and full of cliches that we've seen in other films before. The directing by Keith Thomas was atrocious, and so was the film's editing. I was also very disappointed in the film's cinematography, especially due to some of the color palettes used for the cinematography feeling lifeless and dull. Even the musical score by John Carpenter and his son Cody felt forgettable. The film's pacing was a sluggish mess. Since for a 94-minute movie, it felt like it was going on for 3 hours. And not to mention that aside from my number 2 film, which I'm going to talk about in a little bit, this movie has the worst visual effects I actually put to film this year. For a movie that's under $12 million, that's under its $12 million budget, the visual fire effects looked shockingly cheap, sloppy, and completely dated. How is it that the 1984 movie had better fire effects than the 2022 remake? How is that even possible? And there are 3 big issues I have with this movie. The first being the screenplay. It was written by Scott Teems, who was one of the writers for the disappointing Halloween Kills, and good Lord, it is one of the very worst of 2022. Not only did it have such horrendous and clunky dialogue to the point where it doesn't even lead you to believing that a real human being would say that nonsense in real life, but there are 2 glaring issues I have with the script. The first being that you don't care about any of the characters in the remake due to them being paper thin, one-dimensional, lifeless, and extremely shallow. And the second and final glaring issue I have with the script and why it's such an atrocious mess is due to the film having such an inconsistent tone. Remember when I stated earlier that this movie clearly had no idea what it wanted to be? This is what I mean by this. At one point, it wants to be a horror movie, but then other times it wants to be a drama movie, a sci-fi movie, and bafflingly, an action movie. Unfortunately, it falls very flat, as a result, you're just left scratching your head in confusion while also asking, what are you even trying to be, movie? Now, I don't mind if a movie tries, but when you have a movie that can't even decide what genre it wants to be, it becomes a frustrating experience as a result. And Firestarter is easily one of the worst examples.
Um,
It wanted to be because of this. The second biggest problem I have with the film is the acting. I'm not even kidding when I say that the acting is absolutely atrocious. I feel sorry for Ryan Kira film that gave out a decent performance, but her talent is horribly wasted due to how poorly written the Charlie character is in this one. Also, I really like Zac Efron. I think he's a very talented actor, but my God, his acting was absolutely shallow. Since, unlike David Keith in the '84 version of the film, he brought no personality or charm to Charlie's father's character, Andy McGee, whatsoever. And that leads me to my third and final biggest problem with the film. The fucking ending. It did not make any sense for the movie to end with Charlie being with the serial killer, John Rainbird, given that in the book and in the original film, after Charlie's dad tells her daughter the truth about John Rainbird, not only did she feel betrayed, but she destroys him. So why would you change the ending where she becomes friends with John Rainbird and end it there? If it was trying to hype up for more movies involving the characters of Firestarter, as the director of the film Keith Thomas originally intended, then it doesn't work due to how sloppy and idiotic the ending was, and due to how cartoonish and one-dimensional of a villain John Rainbird is. Like what the hell were they thinking? Yeah, Firestarter isn't just one of the worst remakes I've ever seen. It's also one of the worst horror movies I've ever seen in my entire life, since it clearly has no idea what it wanted to be, and as a result, becomes one of the most boring, idiotic, and reprehensible movies I've seen this entire year. And that's why Firestarter is my number 4. Shame on you, Universal, Jason Blum, Akiva Goldsman, Keith Thomas, and Scott Teems for this abomination. Shame on you.
my number 3 is a movie that's kind of a cult following because of the memes on Twitter, but that doesn't mean the movie's any good. My number 3.
Time to die! It's morning time.
Oh my God.
Oh, that means such glorious. But as a movie, this just feels rushed in all the wrong ways. Outside Jared Leto's okay performance, the rest of the cast feels either underdeveloped or straight cartoonish. The action sequences are both slapping and cheap looking, as some of the effects look like something you can find on YouTube shorts. The story's all over the place, scenes just happened without any real flow between them, and it always shows in a climax that ends as soon as it begins, as well as an end credits scene that even Disney liked
Oh
to
my
pretend
God!
didn't
Don't even
happen.
get me started on that. I'll talk about that in a little bit.
Yes, yeah, Disney doesn't like to pretend it didn't happen, as how Michael Keaton tilted in the Venomverse and immediately decides to form the Sinister Six is laughable at best and desperate at worst. After this movie, I can never look forward to any of those Spider-Man villain solo movies anymore, and especially to just focus on the Spider-Verse movies and the Tom Holland films. And one more thing, Sony, remind me how that re-release went again?
Epic fail.
The one upside is it did spawn a bunch of YouTube internet memes that are just brilliant. It's morbid time indeed. But as a movie, it completely sucks, and it's my number 3 worst.
Number 3, Søren mentioned it on this list. Roland Emmerich. Number 3 is Moon Fart. Words can't even begin to describe how much I absolutely detested every single minute of this fucking piece of shit movie. Moonfall is one of Roland Emmerich's very worst movies, since this is one of the ugliest, dumbest, and most reprehensible and idiotic disaster movies I've ever seen in my entire life. This is one of those movies that not only turned me into a vegetable by the time it was over, due to how idiotic the third act, due to how idiotic the whole thing, especially the third act, was. But it left me feeling dirty and angry, and also made me feel bad for shitting on Adam McKay's Don't Look Up. That's how bad this thing was.
Still think Don't Look Up is worse, but this is pretty bad too.
I'd rather watch Don't Look Up again than this piece of shit. Because at least Adam McKay tried, even though it failed. It was obvious Roland Emmerich didn't even try. The story was beyond cliche and idiotic, since it basically borrows some elements from Independence Day. Yeah, Independence Day. Roland Emmerich's directing was atrocious. The acting was terrible. Yes, Halle Berry and Patrick Wilson do their very best, but the problem is that their talents are horribly wasted due to how poorly written their characters are. Even though I never saw Game of Thrones, I like John Bradley, and I think he's a very talented actor. But in this movie, his acting was so atrocious that I ended up cringing at every line he spoke in the film. Also, poor Michael Pena and Donald Sutherland are horribly wasted in this movie. The score was a shallow mess. It wasted decent cinematography. It's clumsily edited. The pacing was also all over the place. And I know I mentioned this many times before, but the film carries a lot of cliches that we've seen in not only in other disaster movies such as Independence Day in 2012, which I should mention Emmerich directed both of those films, but in other films in general. And there are three big problems I have with this movie. The first being that the screenplay was atrocious. Not only does it carry some leftover cliches from Independence Day, especially when it comes to the characters in this movie, but the dialogue was absolutely horrendous. It's so poorly written, clunky, and cheesy as hell that it leaves you shaking your head and refusing to believe that a real human being would even say that. I know it's supposed to be a movie, but come on. Come on. To make matters worse, the tone is beyond inconsistent to the point where it can't even decide what the fuck it wants to be. Does it want to be a disaster movie? Does it want to be a comedy movie? We don't know. Because the movie can't even decide what it wants to be. And speaking of the comedy they try to pull in this movie is beyond idiotic. And the reason I have a problem with the comedy in this flick is because even when the movie tries to pull in some humor into it, it falls flat due to how cringy and shoehorned in the jokes were in the film. And speaking of the characters, there was not one single fucking character that I cared about in the film. Especially since all of them feel one-dimensional and bland. But those don't compare to who I feel is the worst character in the film, and that is Casey Houseman, played by John Bradley. Not only was Casey Houseman extremely annoying, since he's yet another cliche comic geek character from Roland Emmerich's movies that comes up as being a comic relief character just for the sake of it, especially with that scene where he takes a selfie like fucking hell. Don't even get me started on that horse shit. But the best way I would also describe his character is that he's nothing more than a male version of a Mary Sue that I would like to call a Gary Stu.
If people complain that Ray Skywalker, Ray Palpatine and Florrie Hartberry Mary Sues, at least they don't pull Ex Machina powers out of their asses just for the plot to sum up.
Yeah, really. The second biggest problem I have with the movie are the visual effects. I'll get to why he's called it. I'll get to why Casey Houseman. I call Casey Houseman a Gary Stu in a little bit, but for right now, let's get to my second biggest problem I have with the film: the visual effects. Good Lord, how the the movie cost $140 million to make is beyond me. I'm not even kidding when I tell you that the film's visual effects are some of the worst I've ever experienced in a movie this entire year, other than my number 2 spot, which I'll talk about in a bit. This also shows why I found the disaster scenes to be absolutely idiotic and boring, since the visual effects were so messy and horribly done that they looked like something that came out of a PS4 game. PlayStation 4 game. And to make matters worse, when we see the monster that's destroying the moon, when we see the monster that's destroying the moon and Earth in the third act, the monster is so badly designed in a Cobra-esque design that it looked like one of those rejected monsters that was not good enough to be either in a Godzilla or King Kong movie. And speaking of the third act, this ties into what I said. That's not only my third and final biggest problem I have with the film, but this ties to what I said earlier when I called John Bradley's character Casey Houseman a Gary Stu. Because this implies what I said by this, what I meant by this. Just when you thought the character couldn't get any more tedious after he came across as being a comic relief just for the sake of it, they also decided to make him the superhero of the film by sacrificing himself to save the planet and end up with his consciousness replicated as in an AI supercomputer in the moon's core. In the moon's core. That's so brilliant. That's brilliant writing there. Great fucking writing there, Roland. As you could tell, that was probably sarcasm. I mean, wow, this movie definitely has a lot of originality to it. Not! Also, the ending is nothing but a sequel bait mess, hinting that we're going to get a sequel to Moonfart. Yeah, try again, Roland Emmerich. But judging by the fact that the film made almost $57 million worldwide under its $140 million budget, I highly doubt a sequel to Moonfart will likely happen. And also, how hypocritical of you to say that you. Okay, how hypocritical of you to say that you feel that DC, Star Wars, and Marvel movies are basically the same thing when you have made the exact same Independence Day formula since 1996.
Say what you will about Martin Scorsese, Francis Ford Coppola, Denisovitz bashing Marvel movies. At least they have At least they have the excuse of being good filmmakers. Roland.
No, Roland is a terrible filmmaker. It's one of his, without a doubt. Moonfall is one of his very worst movies and one of the ugliest and most reprehensible and idiotic disaster movies I've ever seen. And it is easily my third worst film I've seen in 2022. Fuck this movie.
My number 2 is a movie you probably know the least about, and for good reason. My number 2 is Summering. You know, when I saw the trailer for this before I saw the shell, I was interested in the story about a group of grade schoolers coming to terms with the end of summer.
So was I.
The problem is that what this movie actually is a complete mess with characters that blend to do nothing memorable, realistic, or even entertaining. And the story throws in all these subplots that are underdeveloped, like finding this dead body and having his ghost haunt them. And I wouldn't mind so much if it weren't for the worst ending of the entire year.
Oh,
Why?
God, that ending.
Because it just stops. The why just disappears, and they don't even get the chance to find out anything about it. If there's one thing worse than an ending that is a slap to the face, it's a movie that doesn't even resolve its own main conflict. This movie started out promising, but then it became pretty bad. But that ending cemented itself as the second worst movie of the year.
Like, really, it was just basically all this setup for nothing. That's what summary is.
And I thought this was going to be the worst movie of the year, but then one movie came out that blew it out of the water. And I'll get to it in a little bit, but for now, oh,
My number two worst film of the year. When I saw this back in April, I really thought it would be the worst film I've seen this year so far. I had no idea that I would see one more film that would be even worse than this one. And Søren mentioned it. It's Morbin time. Yeah, number 2 is Morbius. I mean, wow. Wow. I knew it was not going to be. I knew it was going to be bad going in, but wow, what a train wreck! What an abysmal train wreck this was. It was so bad that it makes me feel sorry. That it made me feel bad for shitting on the first 2 Venom movies. Like, I'm dead serious. It makes the first 2 Venom movies look like Sam Raimi's Spider-Man 1 and 2.
yeah.
This isn't just one of the worst comic book movies I've ever seen in my life. It's also one of the ugliest and most reprehensible films I've ever seen as well. This is one of those movies where it not only makes you question how this movie even got made in the first place, but it also leaves you baffled and flabbergasted at what the hell you've just witnessed. The story was all over the place. The directing was nothing but a clumsy mess. This movie has some of the worst pacing I've ever seen in a movie this entire year. Since for a movie that's 104 minutes long, it felt like it was going on for 3 hours. And not only does the film have a lot of cliches that we've seen in other films before, but there are 5 big problems I have with this movie. 5 big problems. The first being that the character development feels non-existent. Okay. I'm sorry. The first being that the script for this film was horrendous.
It truly was.
It didn't surprise me that these are by the same jackasses that brought us Gods of Egypt, but good lord, could the script get any more messy and idiotic? I'm not even kidding when I say that it's one of the very worst it's one of the very worst scripts of the year due to it having bad character development, where since all the characters in this movie felt one-dimensional and shallow, the dialogue. The movie having some of the worst dialogue I've ever heard in the movie this entire year. It's so clunky and horrendous that you swear you felt like you were watching a Saturday morning cartoon rather than a theatrical comic book film. That one fucking line where one character says, "Pretty little stinky pee," still makes me cringe to this day.
And also get a load of these gems. And get a load of these gems. It's not about more be you. It's not about more be you, me. It's about more be us. Oh wait, it's not actually a line from the movie, but it might as well be.
And another problem with the script, it's so obsessed with characters shoving endless exposition down our throats. That type of filmmaking and writing really pisses me off, because then you're treating your audience like they're a bunch of idiots by shoving such nonsensical exposition down their throats like they're not going to get it. Seriously, this type of trope needs to stop. I understand if they require it, but I don't think it's not. But maybe if it's like one exposition, it would be fine. But up to three, but like three or more, no. The second biggest problem I have with the film is the acting. The acting is some of the worst I've ever seen in the movie this entire year. Jared Leto is so bad as Michael Morbius. I would be lying if I didn't say that it's even worse than his performance in House of Gucci. Not only is his performance as Michael Morbius completely shallow and dull, but he looks so bored playing the character. I know some people praise Matt Smith's performance as Milo Morbius, but I'm sorry. He was the worst thing in the film. His performance as Milo Morbius was nothing but a shallow and overacting mess. And it doesn't help that Tyrese Gibson, Jared Harris, and Al Madrigal are also horribly wasted in this movie as well. The third biggest problem I have with the film are the visual effects. When I saw this back in April, it had officially dethroned Roland Emmerich's Moonfall and Firestarter as having the worst visual effects I've seen in the movie this entire year. Not only do the visual effects in this movie look absolutely sloppy, since they look like something that came out of an outdated PlayStation 2 game, but even when you see the CGI faces on both Jared Leto and Matt Smith's characters, they looked laughably horrendous due to how sloppy and uncanny they looked. How this movie cost $75 million to $83 million to make, 75 to 83 million to make, and yet the visual effects in this movie looked laughably horrendous is beyond me. The fourth biggest problem I have with the film are the rancid action sequences. The action sequences are some of the worst I've ever experienced in the movie this entire year. And that's due to two glaring issues. Number one, the editing is all over the place to the point where you can't even tell what the hell is even going on. And number two, the cinematography is nothing more but a shaky mess throughout. And the final biggest problem I have with the film, you guys knew this was coming, the anticlimactic and horrendous ending and mid-credits scene. This is not only a big middle finger to Spider-Man fans, but also a big middle finger to audiences in general. What were they thinking with this end? What were they thinking with this? What were they thinking? What makes the ending even worse is that was how insulting its mid-credits scene was and how much of a slap in the face it was. It was, since it reveals Adrian Toomes or Vulture, played by Michael Keaton, is free from prison, and he and Morbius team up after Toomes is transported into Morbius's universe. Not only did it make no sense whatsoever, but it's also a huge slap in the face, as I stated before, to the audiences and to fans of Spider-Man. It makes no fucking sense. Yeah, overall, Morbius isn't just one of the worst comic book movies I've seen in my entire life. It's also one of the ugliest and most reprehensible films I've ever seen. When I saw this back in April, I thought it would be my number one worst film of the year. Little did I know, though, there was one more film that popped up that ended up being the worst film of the year. And we'll get to that after Søren explains his number one worst. Without a doubt, Morbius is easily a very big number two.
You know, for the longest time this year, I thought Morbius was going to be the worst movie of the year. And then I thought Summering was going to be the worst. But then, in the month of November, this particular one showed up and blew the competition out of the water for how bad it is and how much it damaged and how much it damaged the studio's reputation. And I'm so glad this went straight to streaming because into a theater because it was flat out bombed. Because the thing about this movie is that has had its worst year since probably the mid 2000s. Trainwreck conflicted me. Buck Wild and Chippendale bored me. Lightyear depressed me. Hocus Pocus and Stray World baffled me. And now this movie just pissed me off. My number one worst movie of the year is this and fucking Enchanted. The reason why this is my number one, because it is a summation of everything wrong with modern Hollywood, and the epitome of why Disney magic is officially dead. Now, I'm not gonna act like the original Enchanted is a masterpiece, but it was a fun movie from 2007, and Adam Shankman has done some good movies like Bedtime Stories and the Hairspray reboot, which I hear good things about. So what the hell happened here? This movie tried to be this one last hurrah for this cast when we didn't even ask for this one last hurrah, especially one that's this atrocious. This almost feels like a throwback and almost a parody of old school Disney tropes, and more like those DVD sequels from the 2000s. With a story that throws so much shit at you and pulling a Boss Baby 2 in that it makes all this noise throughout for the sake of keeping the kids' attention. Gabriella Baldacchino is awful as the teenage daughter. James Marsden is Bailey in this movie. Amy Adams is horrible at how try-hard, whimsical, and sinister she's trying to be, but they're all Shakespearean actors compared to Raya Rudolph, who was horrendous as a main villain. I guess I can appreciate bringing 2D animation back, but it's wasted due to how little is utilized and how schlocky the actual animation is. The effects look like something out of the Asylum Mockbusters. The animals and the talking virtues are straight out of the Uncanny Valley, and even Alan Menken's not even trying with his music. His songs are either forgettable or cancerously sappy. So what the hell happened with this movie that made it so horrendous? Well, I think I know the reason why, and it can be summed up in 2 words. Bob Chapek.
Fuck this cocksucker.
Ever since he was hired back in 2020, he's been making stupid decision after stupid decision to undermine Disney until it became a house of itself. Tossed many of their finished films onto Disney Plus instead of theaters. Increased ticket prices for Disney theme parks. Canceled the Owl House. Or more shortened it. Deny a bunch of money for ScarJo for Black Widow. And you want to know the very thing that got him booted off the CEO chair and replaced with his predecessor, Bob Iger? You see, he did an interview with Wall Street Journal where he said the following words, and I quote, I always say that after our audience puts their kids to bed after watching Pinocchio or Dumbo or The Little Mermaid, they're probably not going to tune it into another animated movie. They want something for them.
Fuck you, Bob. How dare you? How dare you say that? Because then you're. Oh my god. Oh my god. Kid, this fucking animation is for kids. Bullshit, just die.
And Bob, why do you think Disney's animated movies have such high scores on Rotten Tomatoes? Why do you think they got such high praise and awards? Why do you think they got attention from all the video essays, fan art, fan fictions, and cosplay? Why do you think WALL-E just got a freaking Criterion release back in November? Because animation is not just for kids, Bob Chapek. It's for adults as well.
It's for everybody. Not just kids, adults. Adults too.
And saying that disrespects not just the adult fans of animation content, but it also disrespects Disney as a studio, and it disrespects the grave of Walt Disney himself. So, to paraphrase Chris Stuckman, Thanks, Bob said Peck. Basically, what you're saying is you don't respect your audience. That's why your movie sucks, because you don't respect your audience. If you want to make a good movie, respect your freaking audience, man. Then you'll make a good movie.
Fucking audience.
If you don't, it's gonna suck. And Disenchanted did just that. And that is why it is hands down the worst movie of the year, because it lists off all the things wrong with modern Hollywood and modern Disney. Overmilking nostalgia, poor characters and writing, crappy effects, and pandering to the children with flashy visuals and sounds in the most inoffensive, safest way imaginable. So screw this movie, screw all the movies on this list, screw 2022 as a whole, and shame on everyone involved with this forsaken, awful, and flashy piece of dog crap. Hallelujah! Holy shit! Where's the title now?
I was not ready to explain my word. I am right now, guys. I feel so exhausted for having to rant on these movies that I'm gonna try my best with this one, because my number one worst film I saw in 2022 not only shows everything wrong with modern Hollywood nowadays, but everything wrong with Universal as well. Remember when Universal meant something? Remember when they made some classic monster movies and brought some fantastic, and thanks to Steven Spielberg, brought some fantastic movies like Jaws, E.T., Jurassic Park, Schindler's List, and some of the other Universal classics that most of everyone knows and loves. Well, funny thing I mentioned Jurassic Park, because I'm gonna put this quote right there, and I am gonna say this. You stood on the shoulders of geniuses to accomplish something as fast as you could, and before you knew what you had, you patented it, and packaged it, and slapped it on a plastic lunchbox, and now you want to sell it. Well, guess what? Get the fuck out of my face. My number one worst film I saw this year shows everything wrong with movies today. Jurassic World Dominion. This movie is everything wrong with modern movies today. Where you could tell this was just purely made just for the sole purpose of just making money. Just making money. That's all it is. This is one of the dumbest and most inconsistent and reprehensible movies I've ever seen in my entire life. Not only does the movie suffer through the same problem as Star Wars The Rise of Skywalker, where it doesn't even feel like a finale, but for a movie that's concluding the Jurassic movie saga, it doesn't even feel like a Jurassic Park movie at all. You would think after Jurassic World and its sequel Fallen Kingdom received criticism, that Colin Trevorrow would listen to the criticisms and the mistakes that were made and improve, right? Nope. Instead, he and Universal basically just doubled down on the problems people had with those other two movies and made it not only the worst Jurassic World movie ever, but the worst film in the Jurassic movie series. Just let me explain why I chose this as the worst film of the year, and why I really hate this more than Morbius, Moonfall, and Firestarter. Let me explain why I hated those films more. Number one, first of all, the story was all over the place. You came into Jurassic World Dominion expecting dinosaurs attacking people and the city since they're living with each other. Well, I got bad news for you. They're not in the movie all that much. Instead, we get two idiotic shoehorn-in subplots involving Macy and the fucking Locust. for fucking Locust. Like, are you kidding me? And speaking of the former, the Maisie subplot is one of the dumbest and most downright idiotic subplots I've ever seen in a movie. In the last movie, Maisie was basically a clone that ended up being the reason why John Hammond and John Hammond 2.0 stopped working together. But in this movie, John Hammond 2.0 didn't actually make her. It was his daughter, Charlotte, since she wanted a child more than anything, to the point where she impregnated herself, and because of that, Maisie actually has a mother. Great fucking writing there, Colin Trevorrow! God, this is pure genius! This is pure genius! Best writing in the world ever! This is me!
By the asylum standards.
Oh, shit. Anyway, what's even worse about this subplot is that Maisie was responsible for why dinosaurs are coexisting with humans and killing them. And yet, she feels no remorse for her actions whatsoever. Worst character of the fucking decade.
Because say what you will about Evan Hansen, at least he felt remorse over Connor's suicide. Macy doesn't even give a shit.
Nope, she doesn't. And I feel so sorry for Isabella Sermon, since she tries her best in the film, but like Ryan Keir Armstrong, because her character was so poorly written, her talent was just horribly wasted. Second, the screenplay is easily the worst of 2022, because not only did it have messy character development, very clunky dialogue, and an inconsistent tone, but the way they brought back the original characters, Alan Grant, Dr. Ian Malcolm, and Ali Sattler, was downright insulting and disrespectful, especially when Grant and Sattler in this movie act like nothing but immature, shy teenagers, despite the actors playing them, despite one of the actors playing them being 74 and the other being 55 in real life. Not only that, but they don't really do all that much, which made it even worse. Which made it even worse and more. Which made it even more insulting, to the point where you feel like they were just there just for the sake of nostalgia pandering.
Remember Ellie Sattler? Remember Dr. Ian Malcolm? Remember Alan Grant? Oh, I remember. I remember.
You remember when this franchise actually meant something?
Yeah, really.
I remember.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I hear you.
Okay. As I was saying,
I remember.
this movie destroyed me. It destroyed everything I love about the 1993 masterpiece by Steven Spielberg. And I'm not even done talking about everything else I also hated. The acting, while not terrible, was not good. It wasted talents of Sam Neill, Jeff Goldblum, Laura Dern, B.D. Wong, Omar Sy, and Isabella Sermon due to how poorly written their characters are. And not to mention, I was very disappointed with Chris Pratt and Bryce Dallas Howard in performances as Owen Grady and Claire Dearing, respectively, since not only did they look bored being there, but it also felt like they didn't even fit the personality to their characters whatsoever. And because of that, this movie tries to manipulate you into thinking they're more than friends. They're actually a couple, when they had no chemistry in the film whatsoever. But the worst performance in the film. If you thought Vincent D'Onofrio and Toby Jones were the worst and most cartoonish Jurassic World villains ever, their Citizen Kane compared to Lewis Dodson, the fucking shaving cream guy.
The Dodson, we got Dodson here. See, nobody cares.
Yeah, really. Oh my god. Look, well, I can understand why they decided to recast Lewis Dodson, since the other actor that played him in the original Jurassic Park ended up being a pedophile piece of shit. And while I do love Campbell Scott in this movie, his acting was horrendous. Not only that, his character and how even more one-dimensional cartoonish he is not only that, his character is even worse with how one-dimensional and cartoonish he is, to the point where it's hard to even take his character seriously. He is, without a doubt, not only the worst villain of the Jurassic World trilogy, but the worst villain of the Jurassic series ever. Michael Giacchino's musical scores was also nothing but a scrambled mess of noisy chaos. Not to mention that the film is 146 minutes too. Not to mention that the film was too long. So it's 146 minutes, and I felt they could have just cut it down to 25. They could have just trimmed 25 minutes of it down. I mean, there's a difference between being bigger and better and then dragging out for way too long. And because of its excessive runtime, Jurassic World Dominion falls into the latter of that category. And as a result, the movie's pacing is all over the place as well. The visual effects on the dinosaurs, honestly, were not that impressive. I'm sorry, but they just weren't. And not only does the film throw in some cliches that you've seen in other films before, but the most fatal flaw I have with the film is that this movie has some of the worst action sequences I've ever seen in a movie this entire year. Minus the since every single action sequence throughout the entire film had no tension and has the editing relying way too much on jump cuts and the cinematography being nothing more than a shaky mess throughout.
Oh boy, I'm so tension-filled. Can't you tell by my facial expression?
It's to the point where you can't even tell what the hell's even going on in those scenes. It's just absolutely horrendous. After this movie, I'm honestly fed up with the Jurassic World movies at this point. Jurassic World Dominion was overall nothing but a colossal train wreck and one of the dumbest and most boring, reprehensible movies I've ever seen in my entire life. And that is why, without a doubt, Jurassic World Dominion or Jurassic Turd Defecation is the worst film I have seen in 2022. And to Jurassic World Dominion, may an army of demons send you to die fiery hell, you miserable piece of shit movie. Fuck this movie. Well, we did it.
Yep.
We did it. The worst of list is finally complete.
Uh-huh.
And before we go, I want to say this too. If you like any of the films that are on the list, that's totally all right. That's totally all right. I just wish we were on the same page as you guys. I mean, film is subjective at the end of the day, and so is art, and that's all we care about.
Yeah, I mean, I personally loved Blonde. I thought Thor: Love and Thunder was fun, and Nick himself thought Turning Red was a masterpiece. So at the end of the day, movies in of itself are subjective.
Absolutely, yes. I forgot to add that before we began the list, but that's oh well, what are you gonna do? Anyway, guys, thanks so much for tuning into tonight's podcast. I know it was a very long podcast, but we had to get a lot of movies off our chest. And Christian Phrase, if you're watching this, since you couldn't make it tonight, we love you, man. We love you so much. And we want to thank you so much for coming on the podcast this year. And guys, thank you so much for coming on this podcast. This is the final podcast of this year, and I'm really excited to see what 2023 brings to us with not only new podcasts but for new movies as well. Thank you guys so much for a fun 2022, despite how hard of a year it was to get through. And thank you, Søren and Christian, for always teaming up with me once again for these podcasts. It's always a blast here. It's always a blast to like go on these podcasts. And until we meet again in 2023, I really want to say farewell to you all. And one last thing, be sure to. That's all for. Not only are we done with tonight's podcast, but be sure to subscribe to Søren the FilmBrony and Christian Frahey's on their YouTube channel. The link is in the description below. Give them the love they absolutely deserve. They're the wonderful, talented people. And well, if you'll excuse me, I'm gonna go try to lie down for a little bit since I got to get ready for work tomorrow. But until we meet again at the beginning of 2023. Hope you guys have a wonderful new year, and we love you guys very, very, very much. Thank you all so much for tuning into tonight's podcast and the final podcast of the whole year. Hope you guys have a wonderful new year, and until we see you again in January for episode 35, as well as the best of 2022. Hope you guys have a wonderful new year, and we will see you all in 2023. Happy New Year, guys. So long.